Hi and welcome to Apple Cottage. This is Sandy. Today we're doing gardening together. It's Tuesday morning and honestly I'm actually recording this on Monday because Tuesday is Christmas Eve. And so I'm pre-recording it. It'll pop up Tuesday morning before 10 o'clock. And today's topic on gardening together is pumpkins. So I hope you have your cup of tea. This teacup came from one of my daughters. She knows I like a well-balanced cup. So she said that she searched and kept picking up cups and she'd go, nah, it's not a good balance. My mom's not gonna like this. So I appreciate that she got this for me and I try to use it every day and I love dragonflies. Today I have 3 cookies. These ones I made 8 dozen. They only have 1/2 cup of brown sugar. The other sweetness comes from dates because they're oatmeal cookies that have dates and raspberries. And I did film it while I was doing that, so I might put up that video also. They're so scrumptious. They're soft and moist. These ones are even in the freezer and they're still delicious. But today's topic is pumpkins. Now, I love pumpkins. I love pumpkins almost as much as I love apples. Hard to believe, I know, but it's true. Now, pumpkins have an interesting history. I love facts, so I like to look at facts on vegetables that I'm growing. And the most unique saying that I ever have found is that all pumpkins are squash, but not all squash are pumpkins. And I say that to people and they go, what? But it's true. All pumpkins are squash, but not all squash are pumpkins. Now, pumpkins actually got their name, the start of their name, back in the times of the Greek. And it was called pepon, and it meant large melon. In about 1640, the English changed that into pumpkin, and that's what we call it now. Native Americans in North America, lots of Native Americans in South America, like the Aztecs, they grew lots and lots of pumpkins, lots of varieties of pumpkins. And there is actually dated pumpkin-like seeds that they found that are about 5,000 years old. I find that very interesting. And it's interesting when they find old seeds and that sometimes they can germinate some of them. Now, historians say that they believe that pumpkins were probably the first cultivated crop that the North American natives did. And I find that interesting. The famous 3 Sisters is from Native Americans in America. They taught the Pilgrims and other people about how they planted 3 sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. A lot of times that being pumpkins. And I had always heard that they did the squash because it held on the weeds, which would be true. But the main reason why they did it is that they didn't want raccoons and other rodents and small animals eating their corn. And they're less likely to go over to the corn stalk if they're surrounded by pumpkin or squash plants. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, I have 2 pumpkins here. One of them I grew outside. This was a volunteer in my greenhouse last year. Yeah, I suppose the seeds were in the compost. And I actually got 2 of them that were this big. When I pulled them out of the greenhouse, it was still really yellow because they were growing in amongst the tomato plants, and the tomatoes had basically been covering so that the sunlight was hitting the leaves because they were climbing up the greenhouse, but the pumpkins themselves weren't getting very much sunlight. So they were very yellow when I first got them. And even now it's a light orange versus the dark orange. Now on this one, you can see where it went through hail damage. It doesn't matter. It's not going to affect the flesh on the pumpkin. When I pick my pumpkins, I want the plant to be really dying back, if not all the way dying back. And then I like to always get a long stem. That's important. If you cut it too far off, or if I happen to have broken one of the stems, I'm going to use that pumpkin right away because it will not store. Where most of the time my pumpkins, they'll store way into the springtime. And so I can just keep cutting them, and because I can eat the flesh of the pumpkin, I can eat the seeds, and during the summertime I can actually eat the flowers. So they're a very productive plant to have in your garden. And these ones right here, this weighs almost 20 pounds. It's a fabulous pumpkin. These are actually both the same kind of pumpkin. And they're a French pumpkin. Americans call them Cinderella pumpkin because of the ribs on it. But they make a beautiful pumpkin pie. And in fact, in this video, as we go along, I'm actually going to cut this one open. I'm going to take the seeds out. After the seeds are dry, I'm going to roast those. You won't see that part in the video, but you will see the finished pumpkin pie because tomorrow is Christmas Eve. And so when the Native Americans taught the Pilgrims and other Americans that first came to, on their voyages about growing pumpkins and squashes, they made what I guess you would call somewhat a pumpkin pie. But they would cut the center, pull it out with all the seeds, scoop all the seeds out, and then they would pour milk into the cavity and then cook it. And so the milk would absorb into the flesh of the pumpkin, and that was really the first pumpkin pie. If they had some spices, they could have added it to it. But I find that very interesting. I find it interesting that Native Americans in both North America and South America would cut it open on top, they'd scoop out all the flesh, and then they would let this dry, and it became a bowl. And they used those in their everyday life. And I thought that was very ingenious, because this outside shell, depending on the type of pumpkin, can get very hard, especially if it sits and dries. So that's just an easy thing. Now we make our pies and we add eggs and we add milk and cream and spices. But back then, they were very ingenious on the things that they did. And pumpkins are very nutritious. They make a great soup. They make a great pie. They make great pumpkin bread, cookies, custards, cheesecakes. There's just so many things you can do with pumpkins. So why do I love them? Because you can do so many things. Now, pumpkins are known at Halloween. The people carve jack-o'-lanterns. This is not a jack-o'-lantern. A jack-o'-lantern is usually much taller, it's wider, and it's not really a great tasting pumpkin. It might be okay, but not like a pie pumpkin. And it's interesting because the idea of Halloween started over in Ireland. And when they would carve, they didn't carve pumpkins at that time. They carved rutabagas, turnips, sometimes potatoes. And they would carve them, they put little candles in there, and they put them in their windows. So I thought that was kind of fun. But now we do pumpkins. Now, once in a while I'll sell some of my pumpkins. If I have just an overabundance, I'll sell them at the market, but never before Halloween, because there is no way I'm going to let somebody buy one of these and carve it and then it's ruined. They could use paint or markers or things on the outside, but I'm just not going to sell them because I'm not going to have somebody use that as a jack-o'-lantern. Personal preference. And they're my pumpkins, and I can do whatever I want with them. Now, when you buy a can of pumpkin, it's actually a Dickinson pumpkin. They're very tall, they're wide, they're a little more tan. And I have read some things that people said that they're actually squash, but I'm not so sure. On Baker Seeds' website, they call them a pumpkin seed. But when you buy Libby's or the different kinds, that's actually a Dickinson pumpkin. They range from 10 pounds to 30 pounds. Now, the smallest pumpkin that I could find was called a baby boo, and that is a white pumpkin. It's very tiny, it fits in the palm of your hand. And then we have the really huge pumpkins. A lot of times those are Atlantics. And this year, 2019, in California, they had a pumpkin contest. I think Safeway sponsored it. And they had a pumpkin that was 2,175 pounds. Now, the largest pumpkin I could find for 2019 in the United States was 2,294 pounds, and that went to a man in Massachusetts. So it's fun that there's small ones, there's little ones, there's flat ones, there's squatty ones, there's tall ones, there's long ones. Actually, there's pumpkins that are long. And I just find it interesting because not all pumpkins are orange. Some pumpkins are a reddish orange, some are white, they have ones that are pink, they have ones that are green, blue, gray. And so don't limit yourself to just orange pumpkins, because there's a lot of them that have really exceptional flavor and they're still different color. And especially when you're decorating on your front porch, it can be real interesting with the different colors of pumpkins. And I just like that there's different sizes, there's different colors, and there's different tastes of pumpkins. Some of them are really, really good for pies, exceptionally good. There's really a lot of French pumpkins that are exceptionally good for pies. Baker Seeds, rareseeds.com have a wonderful selection. And there's literally hundreds of different kinds of pumpkins. There, you know, that we think of just a few that we see in the grocery store, or we might see at the farmer's market, but there's literally hundreds of them from countries all around the world. Australia grows some really interesting pumpkins. So when you're going to plant pumpkins, if you like these pumpkins, you should save some of the seeds, but I must tell you that pumpkins can cross-pollinate. So you may not get exactly the same pumpkin. If you only grew one type and there weren't other pumpkins or squashes around, you're pretty safe. But they're an open pollinator, and they have both male and female flowers. So the bees, native and honeybees, bumblebees, they're going to go from flower to flower. And if you have a lot of different kinds of pumpkins or squashes in that same area, you could get them cross-pollinated. So with pumpkins, I usually buy my seeds each year. The seeds that are inside, I like to roast because they're really good for you, and they taste good. You can make them hot and spicy, you can make them sweet, just all kinds of things. So I like to start my seeds inside. When I do that, I'm gonna put them in a potting soil mix. It doesn't have to have any nutrients at first. All seeds have all the nutrients they need until they get to the true leaves. So I just use a regular potting soil. I don't use a seedless or a seed starting soil anymore. I tried that for several years, and it was just, you had to be just so much on top of it to when it started to get those true leaves, or it just didn't have the nutrients it needed. And so I just use potting soil at first. I want my plants to be about 6 inches high. Make sure they have their true leaves on there before I set them out. I'm going to not set them out until I know there is no frost danger. And it's important because those leaves will freeze, and you'll have to start again. A lot of times, even at night when I know it's not even going to freeze, but it's early in the season, I will put a cloth over top of them, or I'll make a little hoop, a low tunnel for them, so that they're just more protected and they're warmer, so that they really get a good start. I like to plant them in hills. Now, if you were going to plant them in hills and you were going to start with just seeds, which you can as long as you have a good long season, I don't plant them in the top of the hill. So you have your hill. I don't plant them in the top because a lot of times when it rains, it just pounds on that. I found that it's much more successful if you plant the seeds on the side. And it still gets lots and lots of moisture, but as it starts to grow, you can really direct the plant in the direction that you want to go. And so that's just a trick that I do. I find it works well. And sometimes, depending on your soil, your garden soil, if you have a tendency of crusting on the top of your soil and you planted those seeds on the top of the hill and it has a tendency of crusting anyway, it could crust and then those little tiny plants can't get through that crust. So planting on the side will fix that also. Now, pumpkins are very high feeders. They need lots of nutrients. They need a lot of water and they need full sun. So if you're trying to grow your pumpkin in a partly shady area, it's not going to be very successful. Depending on how many pumpkins you want on a vine, you can control that. Because once it gets, like I like to do maybe of this type of pumpkin, maybe 5 pumpkins on that vine. If it starts to set some more, I just break them off. Because I want the nutrients and the water all going into just those 5 pumpkins. And they need fertilizer. I'm a big proponent of fish emulsion and homemade compost, and so I'm really feeding these pumpkins because I like them large and beautiful. When the pumpkin sets, I always put a board underneath of it also, just so that slugs don't go under there, or it just sits in wet soil. Sometimes maybe have a week or two of a lot of rain. If it's up on that board, I just think it's better, you don't have to worry about any funguses or anything that way. Now, they do cross-pollinate, and you do need some kind of bees or insects that will do your pollinating, unless you want to do it by hand, because every plant will make both male and female flowers. And in the morning, you can break off a male flower and self-pollinate those flowers on your vine to make sure that you're getting the pumpkins that you want. So when I go to harvest them, I want the plant to be dying back. I want the surface of the rind to feel hard. And I want the color. If mine is supposed to be dark green, I want that dark green color. If it's supposed to be orange, I want a dark orange color. Now, I know sometimes weather happens and you have to pick them anyway. And they will somewhat change color, but not as much. It's just like this pumpkin here that was in the greenhouse. It was so yellow when I picked it, but it was getting cold, and I just didn't want it to get so cold in the greenhouse that it completely killed the plant and frosted my pumpkin. So I picked it and I brought it inside and I let it set in the sunny window, and it turned more orange, but not as dark as the other. But I'm sure it's going to be a fabulous pumpkin. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to end the video. I'm going to cut open my pumpkin. I'll take some pictures and some short video clips on that, and I'll add those into the video all the way till when I'm cooking it in the oven. And then I'll take it out, I'll cool it, I'm going to scrape it out, I'm going to mix the pumpkin pie mixture up. I have a fabulous recipe that I've used for 40 years. So I sliced the pumpkin that was in my greenhouse, the one that had been so yellow. And look at how large those seeds are. One thing I like about these ones, the flesh is so thick. And as soon as you cut it, it starts perspiring. It starts to make little beads of water. It just shows to me that this has a lot of good moisture in the flesh, which will make an excellent pie. And so my next steps I'm going to do, I'm going to take it, I'm going to scoop all this out. And these seeds I'm going to save so I can roast them. I think I'll make a cinnamon spice on this one. And then these are going to go in the oven. When I'm about to put them in the oven, I'll show you how I do that. Sometimes people will put them face down with a little bit of water. Other people put them upward with a little bit of water. I've tried it both ways and I think it works both ways. So a lot of times I'll do it based on how the pumpkin will sit. If it wants to fall over one direction, I'm going to turn it the other way. And so I'm going to just take some time. I'm going to scoop this all out. I like to use a spoon, and then I'll take all the seeds away from this center stuff. It's not pumpkin, it's very stringy. The nice thing about these Cinderella pumpkins, they're not stringy. A lot of times you'll have a pumpkin, certain varieties, and the flesh will be very stringy, and these ones aren't, and that's just a nice bonus. So I will be back when I'm putting it in the oven. My oven's at 350 degrees. I've put both of the halves of pumpkins in one large pan. It has about a half an inch of water. Then I'm going to cover this because I don't want all the moisture to leave the pumpkins. And so what I first like to do is, this is parchment paper. And I am just setting the parchment paper on top. Then I'm going to take a piece of aluminum foil and I'm going to put over top of it. I don't like aluminum foil touching my food. I could do a whole video on my reasonings for that. But on a lot of things, all you have to do is put some parchment paper on it. And then you can put the aluminum foil over top. It will help hold the moisture. I'm going to hook it to the sides of the pan. And then I'm going to check this at 1/2 hour. If it looks like it's really soft all the way through, I'll take it out. But it's a large pumpkin, so I am thinking it'll probably take longer than that. But I'll just check it every 15 minutes after that too, until it's ready to come out, and then I'm going to let it cool before I scoop it out. I finish scooping all the pumpkin out, and then I send it through my blender. Sometimes I use my Cuisinart. Either one will work real well. And it made 24 cups of pumpkin. So I'm going to make a couple pumpkin pies today. And then we are going to a special Christmas party on Saturday also. So Friday night I'll make a couple more pies, and then I'll have plenty left for pumpkin bread. I bought some cream cheese today, so I thought I might make a pumpkin cheesecake, and it is just going to be wonderful. When I start to put everything together for the pie, I will do some pictures and some videos, and I do have to let this cool some because it is really warm still, and I want it completely cool before I start mixing up my pie, because of course I have eggs, and I use, instead of evaporated milk like some people use, I use heavy whipping cream or half and half, or a combination of both. And today I'm actually going to do a combination of both. So I'm just real excited about how beautiful that turned out, and I will be back. I'm waiting for the pumpkin to cool, so I thought I would just mix up and show you how I do my pumpkin seeds. Now I first washed them, patted them dry, and then I put them on a cookie sheet, put them in the oven at 300 degrees, and left them there for about 50 minutes. So I just took those out. Now I'm going to mix up my concoction of what I'm going to toss those in and put them back into the oven. So I first melted 2 tablespoons of butter. When I do that in the microwave, I always leave a paper towel on top, just because sometimes there's splatters. And as you can see, it did splatter some. The recipe that I follow actually calls for 2 tablespoons of sugar, but I don't want to use sugar, so I have 2 tablespoons of pure maple syrup. Then I'm going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and I'm using Himalayan salt. And I have about 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon. Now this is organic cinnamon because I like to use as much organic things as I can. And the recipe doesn't call for this, but I like to just do a drop of almond. And this is Watkins almond extract. And so I'll put that in there. And then you're just going to mix that up. And what this one will be, these pumpkin seeds would be what you would call sweet and salty. I first was just going to do sweet ones, but then I thought, let's do some sweet and salty ones. And you want to make sure that you mix that up well so that the cinnamon is all incorporated and it's just not glumped in different spots. So I'm going to put the camera down for a second. I'm going to grab all those pumpkin seeds. I'm going to put them in this bowl and we're going to toss. So the pumpkin seeds are in the bowl and I'm tossing. As you see, there's quite a bit of liquid. The recipe really calls for 2 cups of pumpkin seeds, but inside that pumpkin there wasn't quite 2 cups, but it's okay. And then I'm just going to transfer this onto the cookie sheet. I'm putting it in the oven this time at 350 degrees, and it will only stay in there about 15 minutes, but every 5 minutes I am going to go in and toss them, and then they'll be out. It's just going to be a wonderful day. My house is going to feel warm, and it'll smell wonderful with all those spices that you add to your pumpkin pie. And tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and so we need pumpkin pie. I hope you like gardening together. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning we have an episode. I try to upload it before 10 o'clock in the morning. On this Thursday, we're actually going to talk about soil, how to test your soil, what to do, how to gather that soil. And I just want to explain it a little more thoroughly, because a lot of times I think people take a sample of their soil and there's just things you need to do to get a true measurement of what's good and bad in your soil. So on Thursday we're going to talk about that. Won't be a long video, but it will be an interesting video. So as always, this is Sandy at Apple Cottage. I hope you have a fabulous Christmas. I hope you get everything that you want and that you enjoy your family and friends, and it's just a wonderful time before we start 2020. As always, subscribe, like, please share with the world, and I hope you enjoy gardening together. And this is Sandy.